Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Thursday Night Football is on, and it's only on Prime Video. Touchdown. This week, the new-look New England Patriots take on the reloaded New York Jets in an intense divisional matchup. What a catch. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern with TNF Tonight, presented by Verizon. Not a Prime member? Sign up for a 30-day free trial to stream the game. It's the Patriots and Jets, Thursday at 7, only on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X, at Red Treehouse Pod. And if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note: this episode contains descriptions of severe physical trauma and death. Listener discretion is advised. Sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. It's cold outside, and all you really want to do is curl up with a nice mug of hot chocolate and a good book. You head to the kitchen to turn on the kettle, and then to the bookshelf to pick out a title. And as you hear the water start to boil, a shiver runs down your back, and you think to yourself, I need to find a cozy blanket. A few minutes later, you're settled into the couch, hot chocolate in one hand and your book in the other. A few more minutes pass, and you begin to feel warm. Thinking you're overheated from the blanket, you shrug it off and continue reading. But then, you start to feel feverish. Your face is hot, and you're sweating. And before you can figure out what's wrong, your entire body bursts into flames. I get it. This hypothetical scenario sounds ridiculous, like something from a low-budget horror movie. But spontaneous human combustion is no laughing matter. In fact, since the first recorded case in 1641, there have been several hundred reported cases across the world. Skeptics claim spontaneous human combustion is nothing more than a myth. But advocates claim it does happen, albeit rarely. Theories for why the human body suddenly erupts in flames range from the scientific to the supernatural. And it seems like there is very little in between. I remember thumbing through a Reader's Digest publication, Into the Unknown, as a teenager, and coming across the section on spontaneous human combustion. I'd never heard of it before, but instantly felt sick to my stomach. Truly, it's a terrifying way to die. Aside from the obvious, what makes spontaneous human combustion so scary is that in almost every case, the fire was localized to where the person was sitting or lying. It's as if the body ignited, burned long enough for the person to die, and then went out. All within a matter of minutes, and without spreading to any other area of the room. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the genuinely terrifying phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion. We'll consider the range of theories, from the natural to the supernatural. And you'll hear 5 of the most well-known cases in recent history. What is spontaneous human combustion? And is it a possibility, however rare, that the human body can erupt in flames at any time? Is it supernatural, or nothing more than an oversized myth with a natural explanation? I'll share the details. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Spontaneous human combustion is defined as, quote, a situation when a human body is found with significant portions of the middle parts of the body reduced to ashes, much less damage to the head and extremities, and minimal damage to the direct surroundings of the body. Typically, no observable source of ignition is found in the vicinity of the victim, and a bad-smelling, oily substance is noted. End quote. It's believed the source of the fire comes from the body itself, and that a victim of spontaneous human combustion essentially burns from the inside out. In December 2010 in Ireland, Michael Faherty was discovered dead on his living room floor. He'd burned to death, and investigators initially presumed his death was accidental, as he was lying near a lit fireplace. However, after a more thorough investigation, no trace of accelerant was found on or near his body, and the medical examiner concluded his death was due to spontaneous human combustion. The details of the case are fascinating and scary. The fire was limited to the immediate area where he was found. His body was completely burned, as was the floor beneath him and the ceiling above him. Dr. Ciaran McLaughlin, the coroner who conducted the autopsy, stated, quote, the fire was thoroughly investigated, and I'm left with the conclusion that this fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. End quote. Skeptics of spontaneous human combustion claim there must be a natural explanation for the phenomenon. People don't just burst into flames. Theories range from the simple, perhaps a lit cigarette is to blame, to the more complex, the wick effect. The simplest theory suggests an individual was smoking a cigarette prior to erupting in flames. While smoking, the person suffered a heart attack, causing the cigarette to fall and ignite their clothing. In some sense, this explains the absence of an accelerant, and as the fire burns, so too does the cigarette, leaving no evidence behind whatsoever. A BBC article titled First Irish Case of Death by Spontaneous Combustion, dated September 23, 2011, included an interview with Mike Green, a retired professor of pathology. A skeptic who investigated one suspected case of spontaneous human combustion in his career, Professor Green stated, quote, there is a source of ignition somewhere, but because the body is so badly destroyed, the source can't be found. I think if the heavens were striking in cases of spontaneous combustion, then there would be a lot more cases. I go for the practical, the mundane explanation." End quote. The wick effect is more complex and not quite as mundane, though it is gruesome. In its simplest sense, the wick effect occurs when the clothing of a victim soaks up melted human fat and acts like the wick of a candle, leading to death and the partial or total destruction of the human body. A 1998 study theorized an individual's clothing acts as a wick and the fat acts as a fuel source, allowing the human body to burn like a candle for as long as 10 hours. A Business Insider article dated December 17, 2022, stated, quote, "You can picture people wrapped in blankets, drinking spirits, and spilling the spirits, which basically act like an accelerant with petrol or gasoline. What happens is they drop a cigarette into this massive pool of alcohol, which then ignites and just burns very slowly. We know that fat can actually burn at very low temperatures. Because hands and feet have less fat, they don't provide enough fuel to be entirely consumed by flame." End quote. But here's the thing. If an accelerant were found at the scene, spontaneous human combustion would never exist. The trouble with the wick effect seems obvious. It accounts for the localized burning of the body. But there's something missing. I'll frame it as a question. How did the fire start in the first place? And as important, why didn't the person move to try and put out the fire? Assuming a person was in good health when the fire started, why are so many victims found sitting in a chair or lying in a bed? Other less accepted theories for spontaneous human combustion include alcoholism, self-immolation wrongly determined to be spontaneous human combustion, or botched autopsies and investigations. Believers in spontaneous human combustion assert a variety of theories as well, mostly predicated on the belief that spontaneous human combustion cannot be adequately explained. What's interesting, though, is in order for the human body to burn and be reduced to ashes, the temperature needs to reach nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Theories range from the bizarre, the possible existence of a subatomic particle called pyrotron, to the supernatural, a good old-fashioned poltergeist. Let's look at some of the more famous instances of spontaneous human combustion. In 1951, Mary Reeser was discovered by her landlady. Her body burned beyond recognition and turned almost completely to ash. Her remains were found in a chair, which was also destroyed. And the only part of her body that was recognizable was one of her legs, which remained covered in soot, but still intact. Spontaneous human combustion was ruled out, as Mary Reeser was a smoker who also took prescription sleeping pills. It was theorized that she'd fallen asleep while smoking a cigarette after taking her medication. The burning cigarette ignited her gown, leading to the gruesome scene discovered by her landlord. Mary's own daughter-in-law stated, quote, "The cigarette dropped to her lap. Her fat was the fuel that kept her burning. The floor was cement, and the chair was by itself. There was nothing around her to burn." End quote. In December 1966, John Irving Bentley was discovered burned to death by a meter reader. His body, with exception of his right leg, was reduced to ashes. The meter reader arrived at Bentley's home early in the morning. only to find blue smoke and a strong odor. After calling for help and making an entry, John Bentley's remains were discovered. It was theorized he accidentally set himself on fire when lighting his pipe. However, his pipe was found intact near his bed. After an investigation, it was suggested that he accidentally set himself on fire, as ashes from his lit pipe landed on his robe, which caught ablaze. His robe was found smoldering on the floor near his body. In March 1970, Margaret Hogan was discovered burned to death, nearly to the point of complete destruction. The walls of her home were covered in thick, black soot. Plastic flowers on a nearby coffee table were melted, and a television screen was melted due to the extreme heat. Approximately 10 feet away from the television and the table were the ashen remains of Margaret Hogan, who'd been sitting in an armchair at the time of her death. Connor Brady, the first reporter on the scene, stated, quote, "The lady had been reduced to a little pile of ashes. It was just two little ankles sticking out. There had been evidence in the room of the most intensive heat. The television set was turned into a blob in the corner. But there was very little evidence of a fire. A bit of charring around where she was sitting." End quote. Though her body experienced near total destruction, her legs below the knees remained intact. The floor beneath the armchair was damaged, as were the flowers and television. Beyond that, though, there was no damage to the rest of the room. An investigation was carried out to determine the cause of the fire, but there was little evidence to go on, and the official cause was listed as unknown. In 1980, Henry Thomas was discovered burned to death in his living room, his body destroyed by the fire. All that remained recognizable was his skull and a portion of each leg below the knee. In fact, his legs were discovered with his pants and socks still intact on his body. The chair he was found in was partially destroyed. Details of the scene are eerie. Henry Thomas had folded his glasses and set them down. And before settling down in his chair, he took off his slippers and set them beside him. The slippers were found mere inches from his burned remains. It was theorized that Henry accidentally set his hair on fire while stoking the flames in the fireplace. However, investigators concluded this made no sense, as he was found sitting in his chair. We asked the question earlier, but if he was sitting in his chair with his hair on fire, why not move to extinguish the flames? The official cause of death was burning, but the cause of the fire was inconclusive. In 1986, George Mott was discovered burned to death in his bedroom, his entire body reduced to ash and a few bone fragments. Mott suffered from various health problems, and prior to the discovery of his remains, his son tried to contact him by phone. Those calls went unanswered, and he sent for a wellness check. There, he found the remains of his father. Much like the other incidents, the fire was confined to George Mott's bedroom. The curtains were burned, a phone and television had melted, and the bed was burned. What's interesting, though, is that parts of his bedding were left unburned, along with a box of matches on his nightstand. The investigation into Mott's death was inconclusive for the cause of the fire. A cruel and tragic irony? George Mott was a retired firefighter. I'll admit, The possibility that spontaneous human combustion is real is terrifying. That a human body can potentially ignite from the inside out and burn hot enough to reduce a person to ash is incredibly disquieting. And though we much prefer a rational explanation for these tragedies, we must wrestle with the possibility that despite its best efforts, science cannot fully explain how this happens. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're still left with these lingering questions. What is spontaneous human combustion? And is it a possibility, however rare, that the human body can erupt in flames at any time? Is it supernatural, or nothing more than an oversized myth with a natural explanation? I've shared the details. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.